Hello class, Mr. John here with Chapter 14, Lesson 3. It's called Southern Cotton Kingdom. So the South was initially an almost 100% agriculture area, with most of the population centered more northward. So places like Virginia and Maryland, they were all in the northern South. By 1850, however, this had changed. The population had spread out into the deep South into places like Georgia, Florida, South Carolina, and even Texas was considered part of the South. The economy was thriving, but the moneymaker was not rice or tobacco or indigo, but it was cotton, right there. In colonial times, the main crops of the South were rice, indigo, and tobacco. I remember learning about that in the beginning of the school year. This changed as the European demand for cotton grew. You see, with the Industrial Revolution, a lot of those first factories were textile factories. So meaning they took cotton and they made it into thread and then they made clothing. Because of the Industrial Revolution and all these new factories making clothes, there was a need for more cotton. And cotton itself was a very time-consuming and labor-intensive crop. You see, after the cotton was picked, like it was on the first page, you pull up the white part, but there's seeds in there, sticky seeds, and they need to all be pulled out. They all had to be pulled out by hand. That basically meant that there was like a bottleneck in cotton production, because you could plant as much as you wanted, but you'd still be stuck picking all the seeds out. So you can only pick so many seeds out a day, so there's no reason to plant more cotton because they'd just be bottlenecked at the seed picking part. This was until Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin in 1793. Basically, the cotton gin was a hand-cranked machine that removed the seeds from the cotton fiber with a series of combs. With this new invention, slaves could process 50 times more cotton a day than they could by hand, and that is huge. As a result of the cotton gin and that increased demand for cotton from Europe and other factories, plantation owners could plant more cotton and harvest more cotton much faster. As a result, they were planting more cotton, they were harvesting more cotton, and therefore they needed more slaves. So the invention of the cotton gin actually drove what we're going to call the domestic slave trade. We're going to learn about that in a few paragraphs. So here's a picture of the cotton gin. You can see it's got a belt on there and a hand crank, and it sort of shoves that cotton through those combs and it pulls the seeds out. So the upper South actually wasn't great for cotton. As a result, they still grew tobacco, hemp, wheat, and veggies. In that lower South, the climate was more suited for things like rice, indigo, sugarcane, and of course cotton, which was king and very profitable. The increased need for slaves led to the slave trade being a big business. The domestic slave trade, or trade of enslaved people within a country, hence the word domestic, was centered in the upper South. So even though they used a lot more slaves in the lower South, the trade itself was centered in the upper South. Let's talk about industry in the South quickly. There was very limited industry in the South, and there were two big reasons for it. First off, in the South, cotton was king. A man of means that wanted to make a factory would have to sell his slaves and sell his land, probably, to get the money he needed for the expensive enterprise of starting an industry, starting a factory. He could make just as much money with a fraction of the effort just being a cotton farmer, so it wasn't worth the effort. The other main reason was that a significant portion of the population was slaves, and slaves didn't make money. They didn't have disposable income, so they weren't buying anything, so there wasn't really that much of a demand for manufactured goods just because there weren't people in the South to buy it. There was, however, some industry in the South. Some Southerners believed that they relied too much on northern industry and imports from Europe, and they wanted the South to have some measure of self-reliance, and so they encouraged industry and made some industry. For example, William Gregg of South Carolina and Augustine Clayton of Georgia opened up their own textile factories, so they made cloth. Virginia had one of the nation's leading iron producers, and there was actually another ironworks in Alabama. Despite these few factories, industry in the South was still few and far between. You see here the Tregdar Ironworks but was located in Virginia. Now, for the most part, southern cities and towns were built near natural waterways, and these waterways were relied upon for transport and commerce. There were few canals in the South, roads were in poor conditions, and railroads were very short, and there just weren't a lot of them, and they were few and far between. I believe by the time the Civil War starts, only 1/3 of the nation's railroad line is in the South. These inadequacies of transportation actually handicapped the growth of southern cities and gave northern manufacturers an edge over the few manufacturing places and goods that they actually did produce in the South. That's our lesson for the day. It's a little on the shorter end. Tomorrow we hit up people of the South and we talk a lot about plantations, slavery, slave codes, and the other type of farmers, and we talk a little bit about southern cities. But for today, you have your basic 10-point quiz with 5 questions. That's it for today. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, have a good one.